doctor. Become a doctor.
If you have any health problems,
That's true. If you ever become a doctor, do you really get to dissect a human?
yeah, you have to. Not even just a doctor, like other fields, physical therapy or occupational therapy, any medical field, nursing, all require you to have human anatomy and physiology. All right, so we're going to talk about excretion in humans, and so we'll focus mostly on nitrogenous wastes, but we'll start off by talking about some other types of waste. Right? So obviously the lungs are an excretory organ. They help eliminate metabolic waste, and the metabolic waste that they eliminate is carbon dioxide. So that's an important, obviously, carbon dioxide building up in the blood could make the blood more acidic, lead to problems. So carbon dioxide is excreted from the lungs, and so is water. When you exhale, there's some water vapor that leaves your body as well. That's why you can see your breath when it's cold out, because that water vapor condenses. And carbon dioxide and water, they go from blood in the capillaries surrounding the alveoli, and they diffuse into the air that fills the alveoli. And then as we exhale, we expel that air. Sweat glands are also, a minor excretory organ. The main goal of sweat gland is in temperature regulation. Obviously, as you sweat and sweat evaporates from your skin, it helps lower your body temperature. But sweat does contain metabolic wastes as well. Contains urea, contains some salts, okay? But most of it is water. Sweat glands are also considered an excretory organ. Then we get to the liver, and the liver just is a sort of a multi-function organ. It fulfills many different roles in the body, some of which are excretory. And one important function of the liver is to deaminate amino acids. As we talked a little bit yesterday, amino acids, which are the byproducts of the digestion of proteins, contain nitrogen. Okay? And that nitrogen needs to be stripped off for those amino acids to be used in other metabolic processes to use as fuel and so forth. So in the liver, those amino acids are deaminated. And that nitrogen that's stripped off of the amino acids eventually produces urea. And we'll talk more about those details in a minute. The liver also helps detoxify the blood. Okay, you remember that much of the blood from the small intestine makes its way first to the liver before returning to circulation. And so it can remove toxins, poisons. The liver breaks down things like alcohol and drugs are removed from the blood by the liver. It's why alcohol abuse can lead to damage to the liver over a period of time and so forth. The liver also breaks down red blood cells once they are no longer functioning, no longer useful. They're broken down. And the breakdown, basically the components of the red blood cells are recycled. The hemoglobin and the other parts of that. And they're used actually to produce bile, which is a digestive enzyme we talked about, and other iron salts. And the liver breaks down and deactivates hormones that are traveling through our blood as well. So it has a lot of different functions. This is what a real liver looks like. It's a really large organ in terms of the human body, one of the larger internal organs in the abdomen. It's got several lobes to it. People eat liver of animals too. Anyone like liver? Yeah? I'm not a fan. I know I'm a vegetarian
It
now,
doesn't
but
taste disgusting. It tastes good.
so it's I think has a distinct flavor, I would say. But calf's liver is a common food. Here you see just sort of a cross section of the skin. if we're thinking about sweat glands, which are right here, which release sweat. But along the way we have, hairs and hair follicles. We have layers to our skin. We have nerve endings in our skin. Our skin is a fairly complex organ with different layers to it and different types of tissue and so forth. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how the liver deaminates these amino acids. You thought you were done looking at these structural formulas, didn't you? So what is this? Yeah, that's an amino acid. And we recognize it as sort of the carbon background. It's a carboxyl group, okay? Has the amino group, and it has a functional group as well up here. This one is just CH3, but those can be complex and contain lots of different things. So these amino acids, they need to be sort of broken down and stripped of the nitrogen, okay, if they're going to be metabolized. And so what happens is the amino group gets stripped off to form ammonia. Okay? So you see the ammonia is removed here, okay, from this amino acid. So you take the nitrogen and you take 3 hydrogens off of the amino acid to form ammonia. Okay, and then that ammonia, which we know, tell me about the toxicity of ammonia. Is it highly toxic? Is it non-toxic? Highly toxic. Something that we do not want in our bodies for very long. So this ammonia actually gets pretty rapidly changed into a less toxic form, which is urea. And that happens in the ornithine cycle. What happens is ammonia gets combined with carbon dioxide to form new products. It forms urea and water. And urea is the main form of nitrogen that we actually excrete. It takes a lot of water for that to happen. So we use a lot of water in eliminating this nitrogen, but it's what our bodies have adapted for. So the remaining parts of the amino acid, sort of the carbon backbone, it can be transformed to lots of different things. This is one example that you can end up with pyruvic acid after the transformation of this of the remaining parts of the amino acid, which we know can be oxidized to form other compounds. What is this? What is this? You should be able to recognize this. Recognize it by this part.
Deoxyribosing, I don't know.
So you're getting close.
Ribose.
What is it? Yes, why do you say that, Caitlin? It's 3 phosphates. Phosphate group, phosphate group, phosphate group. Adenosine triphosphate. That's ATP. So again, pyruvic acid we know can be broken down into ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. So the amino acids can be used, but have to get rid of that nitrogen before that. So again, just another view here. So the ammonia is converted to urea in the ornithine cycle. It happens in the liver because, again, urea is less toxic to our bodies than ammonia is. That urea then from the liver goes into the blood and eventually will be removed from the blood at the kidneys. Now in aquatic organisms, again, this isn't necessary because that ammonia can be combined with water, okay, and easily diffuse out of the cell. But in terrestrial organisms, it usually is transformed into another substance, urea or uric acid. So you see that again over here. All right, so the kidneys. Kidneys are very important organ. Okay. This is a human kidney. They look, so if you ever eat kidney beans, they look just like a kidney bean.
That's why they're named after.
Yeah, that's what kidney beans named after, kidney. People eat kidneys of animals as well. Could eat sheep kidneys and stuff like that.
That's it.
But the kidney is an excretory organ, and its job is to excrete urea and a whole bunch of other things from our blood, to remove these waste products from our blood and produce what? So our kidneys remove waste from our blood and they mix it with water to form what? No, not quite. What do we call it? Urine. Just urine. Okay, urine's produced by our kidneys. So what are the things that they remove from our blood? Things like water. Okay. So they help take harmful substances out of our blood, but hold on to things that we need, things that are useful, things like water, glucose, salts, and ions, and so forth. So they help regulate the levels of all of these things in our body. They're reddish in color. They're found in your lower back, okay, and sort of either side of your spine. You have your kidneys. That's why, like in boxing, for example, it's illegal to punch people on the lower back because they're fairly close to the surface. They can be damaged by trauma to the lower back, by car accident or something else could damage kidneys physically. They're about 10 centimeters across, okay? And they're made of millions of units called nephrons. And we'll be learning about nephrons in a minute. But if we look at sort of the overall urinary system here, we have two kidneys, okay? And the kidneys are fed by the renal arteries, which carry our blood to our kidneys. Blood goes through the kidneys and then returns back through, obviously, veins. The kidneys filter out that blood as it's traveling through, and as they're producing urine, it drips down this tube called the ureter, one from each kidney, down into the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder just holds on to that urine until it's ready to be eliminated from the body. And then when it is ready to be eliminated, travels out of the body through the urethra, is the single tube that carries urine from the bladder out of the body. So this is a single nephron. And again, there are millions of these in our kidneys. Okay? And so we're going to talk a little bit about how they work. Okay? And it may seem complicated, but it's actually not that complicated. It should make sense. So what you have here is you have arteries, a renal artery that carries blood into the kidney. Okay, it branches off, and they branch off and lead to one nephron. And what you have here is this blood is under high pressure. It's in the arteries, and it gets to this little area here. It's called the glomerulus. And when it gets there, because of this high pressure, pressure forces parts of the blood out of the blood itself and into this area called the Bowman's capsule. The Bowman's capsule is this yellow-colored tubing that surrounds the glomerulus. And as the parts of the blood are forced out of the blood and into that Bowman's capsule, we start calling it filtrate, nephric filtrate. Okay? And the things that get forced out of the blood there are things like some of the plasma gets forced out of the blood, salts, glucose, urea, amino acids, not the red blood cells. They're too large. They don't get forced out. They stay inside of the blood. And so a bunch of this liquid gets forced here into the nephron. And what's going to happen to it? It's going to travel the length of this tube in the nephron, okay? And eventually some of it's going to end up here. But surrounding this tube of the nephron, okay, there are also capillaries. Okay? And what the job of these capillaries is to reabsorb things that actually are useful. Okay? Because a lot of good stuff gets forced out of the blood along with the waste products. And so the job of these capillaries are to bring back into the blood these useful products, things like glucose, or much of the water that got forced out. And so what happens is the blood under high pressure enters, the glomerulus, and it gets forced into the Bowman's capsule. Okay? And that filtrate then starts traveling down this nephric loop. Okay? And this is called the loop of Henle, where it goes down into the kidney, then loops back up around. And so along the way, as this filtrate is traveling the length of this tube, different substances are being reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay? Most of the water that got forced out gets brought back into the blood. Okay? The glucose, most of it, or almost all of it, gets brought back into the blood. Salts, okay? Different ions, digestive products, most of that gets reabsorbed, but all of the waste products like urea and other waste products, they stay in this filtrate and will end up in the urine. Okay? So as that filtrate makes its way through this loop, eventually when it ends up in the collecting duct, now it's just urine. It's out some water along with the waste products are left, and that's what's going to eventually lead into the ureter and collect in the urinary bladder. If we look at this, so again, what we see are the Bowman's capsule and the tubule, the loop of Henle, which comes back up and around and then down into the collecting tube. But the properties of this tubule change, and so that in different parts, different substances are reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay? So as it goes through the Bowman's capsule in this area, much of the glucose and many of the ions, amino acids, protein are reabsorbed. These are going back into the blood because they're useful products. Okay? Again, as that continues, urea, these are things that are remain in the filtrate. As it passes down through the loop of Henle, much of the water gets reabsorbed back in the blood. And it continues back up. Some of the ions are removed and so forth. Some more ions until eventually what we're left with is just urea, the water, and any other waste products, and then we have urine. Okay? If you look at urine by percentage, you know, the biggest component is urea, okay, the main waste product from the deamination of amino acids, and then a bunch of other salts and proteins and so forth. Okay? Most of it though is water. 95% of urine is actually water. These other solids form the rest of it. And if we look at by percentage, this just breaks down the waste products. Most of that waste is urine and then little bits of other things. We'll talk about excretory malfunctions tomorrow. Oh yeah, that flow chart. Look at that for a minute. The chart I gave you, I didn't refer to it yet.